What we see with middle and lower income consumers is actually a different story. It's that consumers under a lot of pressure in our industry. Traffic for lower income consumers is down double digits. And it's because people are either choosing to skip a meal. So we're seeing breakfast. People are actually skipping breakfast, or they're choosing to just eat at home.
Señores, hoy tenemos un video un poco diferente. Hoy quiero llamar a este episodio de manera informal el episodio del trabajo y de la resignación. ¿Por qué? Porque tenemos un montón de datos laborales que analizar. La parte de la resignación no es lo que se imaginan. A esto me refiero y hablo de la lenta aceptación que empieza a colarse en los medios tradicionales, y es prácticamente la resignación de que la economía estadounidense está rota. Para arrancar, quiero que veamos directo cómo el CEO de McDonald's dejó helado a un panel de CNBC al soltarles la verdad en la cara. Escuchemos.
And what we see is it's really kind of a two-tier economy. If you're upper income, earning over $100,000, things are good. Stock markets are near all-time highs. You're feeling, quite confident about things. You're seeing international travel. All those barometers of upper income consumers are doing quite well. What we see with middle and lower income consumers is actually a different story. It's that consumers under a lot of pressure in our industry. Traffic for lower income consumers is down double digits. And it's because people are either choosing to skip a meal. So we're seeing breakfast. People are actually skipping breakfast, or they're choosing to just eat at home.
Ahí lo tienen. Una economía de dos niveles. McDonald's está revisando precios porque sus clientes están empezando a saltarse comidas. Y ojo, esta resignación aún no invade todo el ecosistema mediático.
So folks, here's the deal. Whatever happens with tomorrow's jobs report, I'm going to say the economy is doing better than you think.
Exactamente. Mientras la realidad es devastadora, Fox News insiste en vendernos humo. Kudlow sabía que las cifras laborales iban a ser terribles, pero como pueden ver, prefieren mantener a la gente engañada, asustada, antes de salir y admitir lo que está pasando. Ahora bien, vamos a hablar de lo que de verdad está ocurriendo. Antes de que salieran los datos oficiales, ya teníamos un adelanto. Las cifras del Challenger, Gray and Christmas mostraban un aumento del 39% en los anuncios de despidos en julio. Al mismo tiempo, vimos cómo la Oficina de Estadísticas Laborales reportó una caída mucho más fuerte de lo esperado en las vacantes. Sin embargo, la tasa de desempleo casi ni se movió. Y eso parece contradictorio. Por eso, señores, es que les dije, tenemos muchos datos que analizar. Las solicitudes de desempleo en el mes de agosto fueron 237,000 más de lo esperado. Pero se perdió 7,000 empleos de manufactureros. Y vale la pena recordarlo. ¿Por qué? Porque no se supone que los aranceles de Trump traerían de vuelta la manufactura.
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country.
Exacto. Mes tras mes se sigue perdiendo empleos en manufactura. Ahora la tensión en el mercado laboral es algo enorme, amigos. Hay fuerzas encontradas. El economista, por ejemplo, jefe del ADP, lo describió perfectamente. Empleadores y empleados han sido sacudidos por la incertidumbre. Y recordemos que el ADP, que rastrea las nóminas privadas, nos muestra una clara desaceleración impulsada por consumidores que están asustados. Hablamos de escasez de mano de obra, disrupciones por el tema de la inteligencia artificial, etc. Son muchos factores. Sobre la escasez laboral, por ejemplo, aquí entra el supuesto cálculo político de Trump. Mantener las vacantes altas es lo que le permite decir los trabajos están ahí. La gente es la que no quiere tomarlo. Pero amigos, hay otra explicación. Y esto le dio un gobernador de la Fed leal a Trump, y ese es Christopher Waller.
but I think there's a lot of other stuff that is driving the labor market down. And I do think it's all on labor demand. A lot of talk about immigration. It's all about immigration. But if immigration was just a decreasing labor supply and labor demand was stable, you would see wages starting to be bid up. You'd start seeing vacancies going up. We're not seeing that. So all the labor supply is doing is masking this declining, falling labor demand, which from a Fed's point of view is not a good thing. Our goal is not to say, hey, the unemployment rate is great while labor demand and job creation is falling.
Inmigración. Parte del plan del trumpismo con las deportaciones masivas es destruir la base laboral de bajo salario y luego poder manipular las cifras de vacantes. Los datos del ADP lo confirman. Los trabajadores por hora ya están sufriendo recortes de horas. Históricamente, precede a despidos masivos.
Firm behavior, employer behavior has changed quite a bit since the pandemic, and you can see it in the hours worked. Right now, average hours is about 2 hours less a week, according to ADP payroll data, than it was before the pandemic. That's consistent with a hiring pattern where you're keeping people on payroll, but they're working fewer hours. Before you cut a job, you'll cut an hour. Right. And so what we're seeing is maybe an underemployed worker as opposed to an unemployed worker.
Ese es el protocolo de pre-recesión. Primero recortan horas, luego eliminan puestos, finalmente llegan los despidos de tiempo completo. Este panorama empeora muchísimo más cuando sumamos otro dato, que más personas están abandonando la búsqueda laboral por completo, y esos son los llamados trabajadores desalentados. Y bueno, no cuentan en la tasa de desempleo. Mientras tanto, pues las vacantes, que sí son las que cubren y suelen ser empleos mal pagados, en gran parte por la política migratoria. Aún así, los salarios no crecen al ritmo de la inflación. Por eso, hoy por hoy, Estados Unidos, vemos gente que literalmente, señores, una realidad, se salta comidas. Mientras todo esto ocurre, en el Congreso se estuvo discutiendo la nominación de Stephen Byron, arquitecto de la fallida política arancelaria de Trump. ¿Para qué? Para un asiento en la Reserva Federal.
I just need a yes or no. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 presidential election?
Thank you, Senator Warren. Joe Biden was certified by Congress as the president of the United States.
Right. So did Donald Trump lose that election?
As I just said, Joe Biden was certified by the Congress.
Did Donald Trump lose that election? Can you say the words Donald Trump lost that election? Are you independent enough to say that?
The Congress certified Joe Biden as president.
All right.
Donald Trump quiere controlar la Fed a toda costa. ¿Para qué? Para poder forzar la bajada de tasas de interés. Poder beneficiar a los grandes tenedores de, por ejemplo, bienes y raíces, no a la clase media. También lo hace porque necesita la Fed que esté maniatada, que esté agarrada por el trumpismo, mientras va a comenzar a empujar leyes sobre, por ejemplo, el tema del stablecoins, poder crear una especie de banco central paralelo, uno que lógico pueda beneficiarlo a él y a su familia. La otra razón para mí es mucho más grave, y es que él sabe que va a necesitar imprimir montañas y montañas de cash, de efectivo, de dinero, para poder tapar el agujero que está dejando su pésima gestión económica. Los aranceles son el mecanismo de financiamiento principal que le queda. Pero si los tribunales lo frenan, entonces dependerá de más deuda. Y la deuda estadounidense ya es carísima, porque el mundo ha perdido confianza, señores, en Estados Unidos. Así que el plan es clarísimo. Imprimir dinero. No para rescatar al trabajador común, sino para sostener a la élite. Seguir haciendo lo de siempre. Ordeñar el sistema. Hagamos un repaso. El CEO de McDonald's confirmó que el 90% del país está cayendo en picada. Fox, como medio tradicional, niega la realidad. Trump prometió traer empleos manufactureros y solo estamos perdiendo más. Las horas de los trabajadores caen. preludio de despido masivo. Y bueno, mientras tanto, Trump coloca a sus leales en la Fed para finalmente poder controlar la maquinita para imprimir dinerito. Esto, señores, es la gran resignación. Un gobierno que está dispuesto a destruir la economía con tal de lograr sostener recortes a los ricos y finalmente hacer lo que están haciendo: manipular las cifras. Ahora bien, señores, esto no es lo único. No es lo único que Trump no puede ocultar. Lo que vimos en esta semana con Donald Trump es algo, sin exagerar, yo creo que un terremoto político y legal. Hablamos de una seguidilla de derrotas en los tribunales que han dejado a esta administración tambaleando en su fin de semana. Y bueno, y su agenda, ¿no?, que es prácticamente desmantelada en tiempo récord. Pero lo más impactante es que no hablamos de un solo fallo, sino de una cadena de juicios que uno tras otro pues fueron declarando sus acciones ilegales, inconstitucionales, abusivas, etc. En esta parte, señores, quiero que lo analicemos para entender cómo es que llegamos hasta este punto. Pero antes, veamos junto este reporte completo para poner el contexto y luego descifrarlo punto por punto. Así que, escuchemos.
From coast to coast, Donald Trump has had an epically bad week in the courts, cutting across virtually every single one of this administration's major agenda items. All week long, federal judges and courts absolutely shredding key Trump administration moves, slamming them as unlawful, unconstitutional. Here's just a sample. A judge reversed Homeland Security's termination of the protected status of thousands of Haitians and Venezuelans. An appeals court ruled most of Trump's tariffs illegal. Washington, D.C. sued over the National Guard deployment there. A judge found Trump's cancellation of Harvard's funds illegal. Another appeals court blocked deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Another federal judge found the National Guard deployment in Los Angeles was illegal. And numerous grand juries have now failed to indict a growing list of Justice Department targets. There's a whole lot there. And Trump's opponents are probably feeling pretty good, pretty thrilled to see all of this play out. But MSNBC's legal analyst Andrew Weissman did have some words of caution this morning. Listen.
When you think about what he did with, let's say, firing FBI agents and career prosecutors, or what he's done with law firms issuing these executive orders, from his perspective, even if he loses, he wins. The people who he fired from the Department of Justice, they're gone. They're bringing lawsuits. Even if they win those eventually, they're still gone. And all that happens is the government pays back pay. Every single executive order that was challenged has been struck down. The district courts are unanimous saying they violate the law. But the effect is still there. So from his perspective, it's like it's not even waiting for the long term. He sort of wins no matter what, even with the courts saying there's a problem.
And joining us now, Lisa Rubin, MSNBC legal correspondent and host of MSNBC's Can They Do That podcast, and Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor and an MSNBC legal analyst. Great to see you both. Lisa, I will start with you. Is Andrew right in your view? Even if he loses, he may win?
I think that's a very astute assessment of what's going on, because in addition to the fact that those people are gone, for example, in the cases that Andrew was talking about, when we think about the National Guard, for example, in these cities, he is slowly inuring Americans to the idea of troops in their cities. And each of these cities is sort of different by degree. Initially, the National Guard, for example, came into Los Angeles because of protest activity, right? They were there in the first instance to protect federal personnel and property from the threat of protest activity, or at least so they said. Then they went to D.C., whereas Elise noted, as you guys were talking in your opening, the legal framework is a little bit different. The president controls the D.C. National Guard. Now, in ratcheting it up and going to Chicago, neither of those circumstances are present. They're not bringing in the National Guard because of protest activity. They're not bringing in the National Guard under the guise that the president controls the Illinois National Guard. Certainly he does not. But we are all sort of now used to a scenario where we see on our television screens troops marching through our cities because he has said the level of crime in America's major cities, all of which, not coincidentally, are led by Democrats, is such that it deserves federal intervention. So even if legally that's not true, over time, he is encroaching upon our ideas of what our cities are supposed to look like and who is supposed to be in charge of law enforcement within them.
And it seems that, not to put words in your mouth, but it seems like what you're describing is that the damage is done, right? So even if there is justice, like the way Andrew described it, for the employees who've been fired, if they do get back pay, if they're somehow compensated for whatever injustice may have happened to them, the damage to our employees and what they are responsible for, the damage to how our cities are supposed to function, that is irreversible.
That's absolutely true. And the same thing is true, for example, in the context of law firms, right? You've got 4 law firms that have litigated against these executive orders that he has put against them. Each and every one of them has won at the district court level. And yet there are many others that have either settled with the administration on terms that have yet to be reduced to paper, and many, many more others that are sort of cowering under rocks, hoping that he doesn't notice. But in the meantime, are they continuing to partner with the kind of impact litigation groups that handle pro bono litigation on behalf of immigrants in this country? Certainly not with the same force that they did before President Trump retook office in January. Absolutely not. If you talk to people at organizations like the ACLU or other immigrant serving organizations, they will tell you that large law firms are few and far between with respect to offering assistance. And that matters at a time where immigration enforcement all across the country is ratcheting up, right? And you see removals and all sorts of excuses for removing people's efforts to naturalize themselves or get their status regularized in this country. When law firms disappear, irrespective of whether they're the focus of his executive order or not, that's another place where damage is done.
Paul, so can you explain why, if the LA deployment was ruled illegal by a lower court, why is Trump still empowered to pursue this in other places around the country if one court has said this is unconstitutional?
Because that ruling only applies to California. And so at this point, he says that hey, he might still send troops to L.A. regardless of what the judge says, but he also says that he's going to appeal the ruling. So the issue is whether he can, against the wishes of the governor, who's the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, send in someone. And the judge let him have it in that opinion. He said that it really looks like Trump is trying to assemble his own national police department with him as chief.
So basically, the overall strategy is one court might knock you down, but you just keep going, keep handpicking a new target, a new territory.
I mean, that seems to be the story of this administration for months now.
See what sticks.
Especially when you know you've got 6 buddies on the Supreme Court, the 6 ultra conservatives who have his same expansive view of executive power and will do what he wants. But what I love about these district judges is that they're seeing through Trump. They're saying, we see you, we know who you are. He often uses the law as a pretext. And so his real problem with Harvard is he thinks it's too woke. But his administration pretends like it's anti-Semitism. So the judge in that case says, yes, Harvard has a problem with anti-Semitism, but I don't see how cutting off research funds for breast cancer and veterans' health care addresses the issue of anti-Semitism. There's this doctrine called the presumption of regularity, which says that when the government comes to court, we give them good faith. Judges assume that what they're saying is legit. Trump no longer gets the benefit of the doubt, and I think that's something his administration has earned.
Lisa, it's been a rough week for the administration in court, but they have also had some wins. Yes. For example, take alligator Alcatraz, for example. At least for now, they're going to be able to continue operating. What do you think comes next in that fight?
I mean, look, the plaintiffs in that case are certainly going to appeal, but let's remember also what that legal fight was about. It wasn't about the legality of Florida operating its own immigration detention center. It was about environmental law. It was a bunch of environmental groups basically saying that this section of this airstrip that had been deserted in the Everglades couldn't be built upon under a federal environmental law. So, yes, I think there will be an appeal. But in the meantime, Ron DeSantis has already taken steps to open a second and a third immigration detention center in his state. And in that legal victory that you were just referring to, one of the judges on the 11th Circuit basically legitimized Florida's interest in immigration enforcement. That's always been understood by judges to be solely the province of the federal government. And so when a federal judge says, no, the state has an interest in this too, that's an alarming development in and of itself.
I want to ask you about what is happening specifically in D.C. with Judge Jeanine Pirro, who's kind of taken this like very tough language against protesters and people who've been opposing what the National Guard has been doing there. She hasn't been able to get the grand jury to basically go along with an indictment against some of these people, including the guy who threw a Subway sandwich at members of the D.C. National Guard. How rare is it that a grand jury doesn't go with the indictment recommendation of a sitting U.S. attorney?
To say that it's rare is a mad understatement. I appeared before that grand jury many, many times. Never saw it. Our colleague Joyce Vance at DOJ, 25 years, she never had a grand jury refuse to indict, in part because the system is so rigged in favor of the prosecution. You're the only person, the prosecutor's the only person in the room, defense attorney isn't there, extremely low burden of proof, probable cause. So it's really tough for a grand jury not to indict if the prosecutor asks. Shout out to our grand jurors. Again, Joyce Vance, never seen it in 25 years. 7 times just in the past couple of weeks. And they're fulfilling their constitutional responsibility. The framers said, we want the people to have the last say over who gets charged with a felony because we trust them more than we trust an overbearing government. An overbearing government, Jean Pirro, that's kind of her emblem.
Wasn't the joke, that like you could get a ham sandwich
indicted,
but now this whole Subway sandwich debacle, I guess, has turned that on its head.
Dude threw a salami sandwich, just for the record. But Pirro charged.
Thank you for that fact check.
All about the facts here. But Pirro charges him with felony assault on an officer. He could get 8 years for that. The sandwich barely grazed his face. I think he would have been worse off eating that sandwich.
Would have really appreciated the grand jury's decision. I think they would have liked that. Paul Butler, thank you so much for being with us.
Facts matter, Paul.
Ok, amigos, aquí es donde tenemos que detenernos a reflexionar. Lo que pasó esta semana no fue una simple mala racha, ¿no? De mala suerte en los tribunales. Este es el resultado directo de un presidente que está intentando doblar las leyes a su conveniencia. Intentar imponer decretos y medidas que chocan frontalmente con la Constitución. El patrón de Trump, perder pero avanzar. Así lo quiero tomar. Aunque Trump pierda en los tribunales, muchas veces ha logrado su objetivo. Por ejemplo, cuando despide fiscales o impone órdenes ejecutivas, que luego son anuladas, el daño ya está hecho. Su maniobra ya se concretó. Los fiscales no vuelven a sus puestos. Y los cambios ya se instalaron. O sea, lo único que queda es que el Estado pague indemnizaciones. En otras palabras, Trump juega que incluso perdiendo, pues, gana tiempo, gana poder. Normalizar lo inaceptable. Otro punto clave. Por ejemplo, al desplegar este tema de la Guardia Nacional, ¿no? En ciudades como Los Ángeles, Washington, D.C., ahora quiere hacerlo en Chicago, si no me equivoco. Aunque los jueces digan que es algo ilegal, Trump ya está acostumbrado está logrando normalizar a la gente, que vean militares patrullando las calles. Menos para mí esa imagen es peligrosa. Eso termina erosionando lentamente la línea que nos separa a una democracia de un régimen autoritario. Y lo peor es que él lo hace bajo la excusa de querer combatir el crimen, pero ocasionalmente es en ciudades demócratas. El doble discurso, ¿no? Con las instituciones, que fue lo que vimos hace unos meses. Fíjense en lo de Harvard, por ejemplo. Él justificó cortar fondos diciendo que esa universidad era demasiado woke. El tema de woke es por el progresismo. Y disfrazó el ataque bajo el argumento del antisemitismo. ¿Cuál fue el resultado? Los jueces le dijeron que no tenía nada que ver una cosa con la otra. Pero mientras tanto, universidades, ONGs, bufetes de abogados, presionados, intimidados, hasta tuvieron que reducir su colaboración en casos de inmigración. ¿Ven? Ese es el verdadero efecto tóxico. Crear el miedo y la autocensura. Y bueno, tenemos por último el trasfondo político, porque no hay que olvidarnos de esto, señores. Donald Trump cuenta con una Corte Suprema que es prácticamente inclinada al 95% a su favor. 6 jueces conservadores que podrían darle oxígeno. Su estrategia siempre es la misma, es forzar los límites, perder en cortes menores, pero empujar el caso hasta lo más alto, donde pues bueno, en la Corte Suprema recibe el respaldo. Aunque es cierto que a veces no lo logre, el desgaste inconstitucional ya lo sembró. Señores, una semana humillante, sin duda, de derrotas legales contra Trump, pero nos muestran 2 cosas. Primero, que sus abusos no pasan desapercibidos, porque sí hay jueces que están diciendo claramente, basta, no trompeta, no lo hagas. Y segundo, que Trump sigue sacando provecho del caos. El caos que él mismo crea. Porque aun cuando pierde, de algún modo está logrando moldear la realidad a su antojo. Y eso, señores, es lo que quería llegar el día de hoy. Es algo muy peligroso. Un líder que convierte la ilegalidad en una herramienta política y que no se detiene aunque lo frenen los tribunales. Pero bueno, quiero saber qué opinan ustedes. ¿Creen que estas derrotas legales significan de algún modo el principio del fin del trumpismo dentro de unos años? ¿O creen, como siempre, que va a encontrar la manera de poder darle la vuelta, ¿no? Poder terminar como la víctima? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerden, como siempre, darle like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete al canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.